The wind slashed through New York like a sharpened blade, snow falling steady from a pale, bruised sky, muffling the city's usual thrum. Under the dim glow of a flickering street lamp, a man named Jonathan Hay stood at a nearly deserted bus stop. His olive-green jacket, threadbare and worn, barely held back the chill. He clutched a manila folder close to his chest, inside which were 5 resumes, each marked by silence, rejection, and a slowly eroding hope. At 46, Jonathan had once been a construction engineer, a widower, a father, and now a man without a home. The realization weighed heavy on him, like the snow piling at his feet. A neon sign from a pharmacy across the street blinked red, 8:41 p.m. The bus was late. Cold had already seeped into his boots and up through his bones. Then, through the snowfall, a woman appeared. Late 30s, business skirt and blouse, no coat, her heels tapping a fast rhythm on icy pavement. Her hair clung damp to her face, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. She stepped under the awning, near him, breath ragged, hands shaking. Jonathan tried not to stare. She looked like she belonged somewhere warm, somewhere far from here. Clean, polished, yet clearly not immune to the biting air. She rubbed her hands together, trying in vain to summon heat. He looked away. Just another night. Just another stranger. But then the wind howled, and she flinched. He looked at her again. His jacket wasn't much, but it was something. He could stay warm, keep quiet, pretend not to care, like most people. But he didn't. Without a word, he shrugged off his coat and stepped toward her. Startled, she blinked. "You don't have to do that," she said. He gave her a tired smile. "I've already lost enough today. This coat, it's all I have left to give." She hesitated. "But you need it more than I do." Still, he gently draped it over her shoulders. "Not tonight." The warmth startled her. It smelled of something simple. Soap, maybe coffee. Comfort. She pulled it tighter. "Thank you," she whispered. He nodded, folding his arms to retain what little warmth he had left. "What's your name?" she asked after a beat. "Jonathan. I'm Elise." "Nice to meet you, Elise." She glanced at him. "You shouldn't have given me your jacket." He smiled faintly. "Probably not. But I couldn't just let you freeze." A low rumble broke their quiet exchange. Headlights cut through the snowy mist. The bus arrived. Elise stepped forward, then paused and turned back. "Do you have somewhere to go?" Jonathan shrugged. "Somewhere," he said, not mentioning it was the rusting pickup truck behind an abandoned warehouse. She reached into her bag and handed him a card. "In case you ever need anything." He nodded and slipped it into his folder without looking. People said things like that all the time. They rarely meant it. She stepped onto the bus, wrapped in his jacket like armor. He watched until the tail lights faded into the snow, then stood alone. He shivered, not from the cold, but from something deeper. He turned toward the darkened streets, whispering, "Maybe tomorrow," and walked into the night. The truck wasn't much. A '98 Dodge, rust curling along the wheel wells, its heater long since dead. But it was shelter. Jonathan reached it just after 9, snow crunching beneath his worn shoes. He opened the door, climbed in, and shut out the world. Inside, on the passenger seat, were a folded blanket, a pillow, and a lunchbox tucked beneath the dashboard. From the glove compartment, he pulled out a small tin box. Inside was a crumpled photograph. His wife Camille, her smile bright. Their son, Lucas, 7 years old, with a goofy grin and missing tooth. "Good night, Camille." "Good night, Lucas," he whispered. He leaned back, letting memory flood him. Once, he was Jonathan Hayes, builder of schools and hospitals. Camille was a kindergarten teacher who laughed like spring wind. Lucas had her laugh. They weren't wealthy, but they were content. Then came the cancer. By the time they found it, it was stage 4. 9 months later, she was gone. Jonathan quit his job to care for her. Then the bills came. Then the debt. The house sold. Their world shrunk until it was just the truck. He turned the back seat into a spaceship for Lucas, made soup into galaxy rations. He walked Lucas to school daily, clean-shaven, shoes polished. "Why do you still cut your hair?" a shelter worker once asked. He had smiled. "Because my son needs to believe things can get better. And I need to look like I believe that too." He worked whatever jobs he could, hauling junk, patching roofs, cleaning alleys. It was enough to keep them together. Until last fall, a social worker said Lucas needed stability. A real home. Jonathan didn't fight. He signed the papers, kissed his son, and whispered, "Just for now. I'll come back for you." Since then, he'd climbed every day. Job fairs, libraries, workshops. Building a plan. Tonight had shaken that plan. But as he lay beneath his blanket, he thought of Elise. Of her surprise. Of the way she clutched his coat. Maybe he gave it because she reminded him of Camille. Or maybe, just maybe, because he still needed to believe he could do good. Elise Bennett stepped into the warmth of her high-rise apartment building. The doorman nodded, but she barely noticed. She clutched the coat around her like armor. Inside her penthouse, silence reigned. She peeled off the coat, about to discard it, when her hand brushed something inside the pocket. A piece of paper. It was a child's drawing, worn and faded. Two stick figures stood under a crooked sun. Dad and me, with a heart in between. At the bottom, in shaky crayon, "I love you, Daddy, Lucas." Her breath caught. The weight of it hit her. This wasn't just a man with a coat. This was a father. One who carried love in his pocket. One who gave, even when he had nothing. Her apartment, all steel and glass, suddenly felt too quiet. She sat on the edge of her couch, jacket in one hand, drawing in the other. Tears welled up uninvited. She hadn't cried in years. Not since she was a little girl waiting outside a church, shivering and alone. Then, a man with kind eyes gave her his coat and simply said, "You'll be okay." She never saw him again. But that moment had changed everything. She'd clawed her way from the foster system, graduated on scholarships, and built Bennett Innovations, a tech empire. She had power, wealth. But she'd forgotten what it meant to need. To give. Jonathan reminded her. She stared at the drawing, then clutched the coat tight. And she cried. The next morning, Elise didn't dive into emails or meetings. Instead, she summoned her assistant. "I need you to help me find someone." "Who?" "Jonathan. No last name. He was at the 56th and Madison bus stop last night. He gave me his coat." Within days, her team found him. Jonathan Hayes. Former structural engineer. No recent employment. No criminal record. No fixed address. Just absence. He was living out of a truck in the Bronx. "I want to go there," Elise said. When she arrived, he was asleep inside the truck. She walked quietly through the snow. The door creaked open. Jonathan stepped out, blinking. When he saw her, he froze. "Elise." "Hi, Jonathan." He looked down at his worn clothes. "What are you doing here?" "I came to find you." He crossed his arms. "Why?" "Because I couldn't stop thinking about what you did. About who you are." He gave a bitter chuckle. "A thank you card would have been enough." "This isn't about thanks. It's about not letting kindness go unnoticed." They stood in silence, snow falling around them. Then she said, "Come with me." Jonathan stood in the lobby of Bennett Innovations, staring at glass walls and polished chrome. "I don't belong here," he murmured. "Yes, you do." In a private room, Elise slid a folder toward him. "A job proposal," she said. "For what?" "For being the soul of this company. A position I created. Advisor on human values. Compassion. Perspective." He stared at the paper. "I sleep in a truck. You gave your coat to a stranger. That's more than most CEOs do." She leaned closer. "You don't need a degree to teach people how to care. You live it." His throat tightened. He didn't speak, but he nodded, and the world shifted. In time, Jonathan became the heart of the company. Not with strategy, but with stillness. With empathy. He got a house, a small one with a porch. Lucas came home. Their first dinner together was spaghetti. "You kept your promise," Lucas said. Jonathan could only smile. He and Elise became friends, then more. Quietly. Naturally. 1 year later, at a company event called Kindness Day, Elise stood before the crowd and told their story. Behind her, the coat was framed under glass. "One small act of kindness can rewrite a life," the plaque read. She called him to the stage, gave him the deed to his house. Jonathan reached into his pocket, pulled out a ring. "Elise Bennett, will you marry me?" Her tears answered before her words. They married at a small community center for foster kids. The cake was made by a volunteer. The flowers by children. It was imperfect, and it was perfect. The coat stood by the altar. A reminder that sometimes, the smallest gestures rewrite the greatest stories. And Jonathan, once forgotten by the world, now stood at the center of it, not because he had much, but because he gave what he had. And that changed everything.